The old man sitting beside me never spoke a word. He just sat there guarding me from a threat I had not yet noticed. When my husband laughed in front of the entire room and called me a worthless rule enforcer, the stranger remained silent, but his hand gripped his cane until his knuckles turned white. Right when I thought I had lost everything, he stood up, signaled for a lawyer to enter, and changed my entire world forever. My name is Zara Ortiz, and at 33 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible in a neighborhood full of people who were supposed to be my community. The air inside the Oakwood Estates Community Center in Savannah, Georgia, was thick enough to chew on a heavy blend of expensive perfume, stale air conditioning, and the inescapable humidity that clung to the city even in late October. I stood in the shadows of the velvet curtain stage, my fingers clutching a plastic clipboard so tightly that the edges bit into my skin. I was not wearing couture. I was not wearing the diamond tennis bracelet my husband had bought for his mother last Christmas. I was wearing a navy blue gown I had rented online for $150, and it was currently chafing against my ribs every time I took a breath. From where I stood, the Gala looked like a kaleidoscope of gold leaf and old money. This was the Oakwood Estates HOA annual autumn fundraiser, the crown jewel of the neighborhood's social calendar. The tickets cost $200 a plate, basically a special assessment in disguise. The wine was imported from a vineyard in France that did not sell to the public. And I, the wife of the HOA board treasurer, was standing next to the catering staff, checking off a list of dietary restrictions for Table 7, all while making sure no one violated the sacred grass height rule or brought in unapproved decorations, because God forbid a centerpiece was half an inch too tall. The Karen would issue a fine before the appetizers even hit the table. "Excuse me, ma'am." A young server with a headset whispered, nearly bumping into me with a tray of champagne flutes. "We are missing a vegan option for the mayor's table." I handled it, I said, my voice low and automatic. "I sent the sous chef to the back 20 minutes ago. It is plating now. Go check the warming station." He nodded and vanished. I looked down at my clipboard. My name was not on the program. It never was. I was just Zara, the one who remembered that Mrs. Gable was allergic to shellfish and that the HOA strictly prohibited any shellfish at events to avoid liability. The one who knew that the spotlight on the podium needed to be angled 3 degrees lower, so it did not glare off my husband's glasses, and that the parking lot must have every car perfectly aligned or the president would send a violation notice at dawn. My husband, Graham Whitlock, stood near the entrance under the cascading light of a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than the house I grew up in. At 38, Graham was the picture of suburban aristocracy, tall, with sandy blonde hair that was perfectly coiffed. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He was laughing at something the mayor was saying, his head thrown back, his teeth white and perfect. Hanging on his arm was Tessa Bell. She was 24, perhaps 25. She was introduced as the new HOA compliance coordinator, a title that sounded important, but meant she was the one enforcing the ridiculous rules like no political flags visible from the street or no basketball hoops that could be seen by neighbors. She wore a dress that was a shade of red so vibrant it looked like a fresh wound against the sea of black tuxedos. Her hand rested on Graham's forearm. Her fingers manicured to sharp points. They looked like a couple. They looked like the king and queen of this HOA kingdom, bright and shiny and untouchable. I looked down at my shoes. They were sensible black heels, chosen because I knew I would be running back and forth between the kitchen and the sound booth all night, and also making sure no one parked in the wrong spot or the Karen would have a fit. "Zara." The sharp voice cut through the ambient jazz. I stiffened and turned to see Marion Whitlock, my mother-in-law, approaching me. She was a woman made of steel and hairspray, the infamous HOA president known for fining residents for grass too tall or holiday lights left up too long. She held a glass of white wine as if it were a weapon. The microphone on the podium is making that dreadful feedback noise again. Marion hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the hem of my rented dress with distinct disapproval. "I thought I told you to check the sound system at 5 in the afternoon. And don't forget to make sure the centerpieces comply with the height restriction rule. We can't have anything blocking the view or it's a violation." "I did check it, Marion," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "The batteries were low in the backup mic. I replaced them. It is fine now." "Well, check it again," she snapped, turning her back on me before I could respond. Graham is going up in 10 minutes. If there is a single screech, it is on your head. We cannot have amateur hour when we are trying to secure the park renovation grant. She walked away, greeting a neighbor with a smile so warm it could have melted butter, but I knew she was the one who had fined that same neighbor last month for a too-tall mailbox. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding and turned back to the tech table. This was my life. I was the wife when it was convenient and the hired help when it was necessary. But I was never paid like the help, and I was never treated like the wife. And in HOA land, that meant I was the one who got the petty fines while they broke the rules behind closed doors. I moved toward the back of the room, skirting the edge of the crowd to avoid being drawn into conversations I was not supposed to be part of. That was when I saw him. There was a row of chairs set against the far wall, mostly empty, reserved for elderly residents who needed a break from standing. In the last chair closest to the fire exit sat a man I had never seen before. He was old, perhaps in his late 70s or early 80s. He was not dressed like the other men in the room. He wore a gray suit that looked clean but worn, the fabric slightly shiny at the elbows, the cut unfashionable by at least 2 decades. He wore no tie, his shirt was buttoned to the top, clean and white, his hair was a shock of silver combed back neatly. He held a simple wooden cane between his knees, his hands resting on the handle. He was not drinking. He was not talking. He was just sitting there, completely still like a stone in a rushing river. And he was watching me. I paused, clutching my clipboard against my chest. Usually when people at these parties looked at me, their gazes slid right off as if I were part of the furniture. But this man's gaze was heavy. Felt tangible. He watched me with a focused intensity that made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. It was not a predatory look. It was not the way Graham looked at me when he was angry or the way Marian looked at me when she was disappointed. It was a look of assessment, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I hesitated, wondering if I should call security. He did not have a donor badge. He did not look like he had $200 for a plate of rubbery chicken, but then the lights in the ballroom dimmed and the spotlight swung toward the stage. The heavy bass of the intro music started to thump. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome the treasurer of the Oakwood Estates HOA, Mr. Graham Whitlock." The applause was thunderous. I slipped into a chair at table 19, the overflow table near the kitchen doors, usually reserved for junior volunteers and distant cousins. It was empty tonight save for me. Graham took the stage. He looked magnificent. He owned the room from the moment he stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted the stand. No feedback. Thanks to me, and flashed that charming self-deprecating smile that made homeowners open their checkbooks. "Thank you," Graham said, his voice smooth as bourbon. "Thank you all for being here. When my father started this HOA 40 years ago, he had a vision of a Savannah neighborhood that took care of its own. He spoke for 10 minutes. He told jokes that landed perfectly. He spoke about community and the obligation of the fortunate. He mentioned Tessa Bell by name, thanking her for her fresh vision and tireless energy in organizing the gala. The spotlight briefly swept over the crowd to find Tessa, who waved demurely from the front row, seated right next to Marianne. Then Graham's tone shifted. He put on his serious, humble face. "But you know," he said, chuckling softly, "none of this happens by magic. Behind every great HOA board, as they say, is a woman who makes sure the rules are followed, the grass is mowed, and the microphones work." A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. My stomach twisted. I knew this part. This was the ritual sacrifice. "I want to take a moment to thank my wife, Zara," Graham said. He scanned the room looking for me. He knew exactly where I would be, sitting in the back near the kitchen. "Zara, where are you, honey? Stand up." The spotlight swung wildly, blinding me for a second. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I forced a smile onto my face. It was muscle memory by now. "There she is," Graham said, his voice dripping with condescension disguised as affection. "My Zara, she is not one for the limelight. Folks, she is, how do I put this? She is the best in the world at being in the background, the unsung hero who makes sure the lights stay on and the violations stay off so the rest of us can shine. Let us give her a hand." The applause was polite, brief, and dismissive. It was the kind of applause you give to a secretary who brought good coffee. I stood there bathed in the harsh light, feeling stripped naked. He had not called me his partner. He had called me his background. He had publicly defined my place in the shadows, serving him so he could shine, while the HOA Karen queen watched from the front row, smirking like I was an old appliance, still functional but embarrassing to have in the living room. My hands were shaking. I reached for my water glass to steady myself, but my fingers were clumsy. I knocked the glass, sending a wave of ice water cascading across the white tablecloth. Great, I whispered to myself, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. Just great. I grabbed for a napkin, but before I could reach the dispenser, a hand placed a crisp white handkerchief on the spill. I froze. I looked up. The old man was there. He had moved. I had not heard him approach. In the noise of the applause and the clatter of silverware, he had silently risen from his chair by the wall and taken the empty seat right next to me. He was sitting less than a foot away. He did not look at me. He was looking straight ahead at the stage where Graham was now auctioning off a weekend in Tuscany. The old man's profile was sharp. His skin weathered like old leather. Up close I could smell him, not expensive cologne but something earthy. Sandalwood and old paper. He pressed his hand down on the handkerchief, soaking up the water that was threatening to drip onto my rented dress. He did it with a calm, deliberate efficiency. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. He did not answer. He did not even turn his head. He just sat there, his shoulder angling slightly forward, creating a physical barrier between me and the rest of the room. It was a subtle movement, but the intention was clear. He was blocking their view of me. He was shielding me from their judgment. I stared at him, bewildered. "Do I know you?" I asked softly. "Nothing." He blinked. His eyes fixed on Graham, but his jaw was set hard. His hand, the one not holding the handkerchief, was resting on the head of his cane. He was gripping it so tightly that the veins on the back of his hand stood out like cords. His knuckles were stark white. It was anger, pure, silent, suppressed anger, but it was not directed at me. I followed his gaze. He was staring at Graham. If looks could draw blood, my husband would have been bleeding out on the stage. The strangeness of the moment suspended my own humiliation. Who was this man? Why was he sitting at the overflow table? Why was he so angry at Graham? And why did he help me? The gala dragged on for another hour. The old man stayed beside me the entire time. He did not drink the wine the server poured. He did not eat the salad. He just sat, a silent sentinel. His presence radiating a strange, heavy gravity. I found myself matching his breathing, in out, slow and steady. His silence felt like a wall I could lean against. When the lights came up and the band started playing upbeat jazz for the mingling hour, the spell broke. Graham was descending from the stage, surrounded by homeowners. Tessa was right there, handing him a towel to dab his forehead, laughing at something he whispered. I stood up, needing to escape. I needed to go to the bathroom, to breathe, to get away from the suffocating air of the ballroom. "Excuse me," I said to the old man. He stood when I stood. It was an old-school gesture of respect that no man in Savannah had offered me in years. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin, and stepped back to let me pass. He still had not spoken a single word. I made my way through the crowd, keeping my head down. I was almost to the exit when a hand caught my elbow. It was Graham. He was glowing with the adrenaline of the performance. He smelled of scotch and success. He pulled me in close, his arm wrapping around my waist in a display of marital possession for the benefit of the watching homeowners. To anyone watching, it looked like a loving embrace, but his grip was too tight. His fingers dug into the soft flesh of my side. "You dropped your water," he whispered, his lips brushing my ear. His voice was sweet, sugary, but his eyes were flat and cold like a shark's. "Clumsy Zara." Marion noticed. "I am sorry," I murmured, the automatic apology rising to my lips. "I was just sh." He cut me off. He squeezed my waist harder. "It does not matter. You did fine. The lights were good." He pulled back slightly to look me in the face. He was smiling, but it did not reach his eyes. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice low so only I could hear. "I need you to do something for me tonight." When we get home, I have a set of papers on the desk in the study. Just some restructuring for the HOA trust. I need your signature tonight. Can it not wait until morning? I'm exhausted, Graham. It has to be tonight, he said. The sweetness evaporated for a split second, replaced by a flash of irritation before the mask slid back into place. It is time-sensitive. Besides, if you sign them tonight, I was thinking maybe you do not need to come to these events anymore. You hate them, right? You are always so anxious. Sign the papers and you can stay home from now on. You can just focus on the house. No more clipboards. No more spilled water. He made it sound like a gift. Freedom. But the way he said it made a shiver crawl down my spine. You can just focus on the house. It sounded less like retirement and more like confinement. Okay, I said, because saying no to Graham in public was not an option. I will look at them. Good girl, he said. He kissed my cheek, a dry, hard peck. Go wait in the car. Tessa and I have to say goodbye to the board members. I will be out in 20 minutes. He released me and turned back to the room, instantly transforming back into the golden boy of Oakwood Estates. I stood there for a moment, rubbing the spot on my arm where he had grabbed me. I looked back toward table 19. The chair was empty. The old man was gone. The only proof he had been there at all was the white handkerchief still resting over the damp spot on the tablecloth, absorbing the mess I had made. I turned and walked out into the humid night, the unease settling in my stomach like a stone. I did not know it then, but the papers waiting on the desk were not just papers, and the old man was not just a guest. The board was set, the pieces were moving, and I was about to find out that I was not the pawn I thought I was. I was the queen, and it was time to take the king. The silence in the car on the way home from the gala was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Graham drove his sleek black sedan with one hand on the wheel, humming along to a classical station, completely unbothered by the humiliation I had just endured. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights of Savannah, letting the rhythmic flash of light hypnotize me, pulling me back into the memories of how I ended up in this passenger seat, trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like a prison cell on the inside. I met Graham 5 years ago. I was 28 years old, working as a senior coordinator at Hawthorne Ridge Consulting. I was not a damsel in distress. I was good at my job. I was organized, ambitious, and on track for a promotion to regional manager. I had a life. I had plans. Graham Whitlock was a client. He did not come charging into my life with roses and grand gestures. That was not his way. Graham was insidious. He was safe. He was the man who held the elevator door. He was the man who remembered how I took my coffee black with 2 sugars and had it waiting on the conference table before I arrived. He courted me with the precision of a merger acquisition. He spoke about building a nest. He spoke about stability. He told me he was tired of the shallow women in his social circle, the ones who only cared about the Whitlock name. He told me he wanted someone real, someone with grit, someone like me. I believed him. I was so tired of fighting for every inch of respect in the corporate world that when a handsome, wealthy man offered to share his burden with me, I mistook it for partnership. I did not realize he was just looking for a competent employee he could sleep with and who could keep the HOA books straight. The trap closed slowly. After the wedding, which was planned entirely by Marianne and looked more like a corporate merger ceremony than a celebration of love, the requests started. It began with a simple suggestion. Zara, honey, the HOA is a mess right now. Graham had said 3 months into our marriage. We need someone with your organizational skills to sort out the filing system. Just for a month, just until we hire a new director. I agreed. I took a leave of absence from Hawthorne Ridge. 1 month turned into 3, then 6. When I mentioned going back to work, Graham looked wounded. But you are so good at this, he said. And the house needs managing. Marianne is getting older. We need you here. Why do you want to work for strangers when you can build our empire? Our empire? That was the phrase that hooked me. I thought I was investing in our future. I did not see that I was being erased. I resigned from Hawthorne Ridge. That was the day Zara Ortiz, the professional, died. In her place rose Mrs. Graham Whitlock, the glorified personal assistant. Marian always called me family, but the word tasted like ash in her mouth. Family meant I was the one who had to issue the violation notices because Marianne did not want the confrontation. Family meant I was the one who had to call the landscapers and scream at them when the grass was the wrong shade of green. Family meant I was the one who stood in front of the board and apologized for clerical errors that were actually Graham's negligence. I took over the bookkeeping for the Oakwood Estates HOA because I was good with numbers. I managed thousands of dollars in dues. I tracked every grant, every special assessment, every expense. But I was a ghost in the machine. I drafted the emails, crafted the strategic plans, and wrote the thank you notes to the biggest homeowners. Then Graham or Tessa Bell would sign them. Tessa, she had appeared 6 months ago, bright and shiny and full of innovative compliance strategies. Suddenly my office in the HOA building was needed for storage, and I was moved to a desk in the hallway. Then eventually told it was better if I worked from home. Tessa took over the board meetings. Tessa went to the lunches. I stayed at the kitchen table reconciling receipts. I knew something was wrong long before tonight. It was the money. We were comfortable. Or rather, Graham was comfortable. The Whitlocks were Oakwood royalty. Yet I had to ask for permission to buy groceries. I had a credit card. But every purchase over $50 triggered a text alert to Graham's phone. If I bought a new dress, he would ask why. If I ordered books, he would ask if I had read the old ones yet. It was a leash long enough to let me walk around the house, but short enough to choke me if I tried to leave the yard. The breaking point, or the moment the cracks became too wide to ignore, happened 2 months ago. Graham had come home with a document. He placed it on the dinner table next to the roast chicken I had spent 3 hours preparing. "What is this?" I asked. "Just some paperwork for the accountant," Graham said, pouring himself a glass of wine. "Tax purposes, asset protection, standard stuff." I picked it up. It was titled Reimbursement and Lifestyle Upgrade Agreement. I read it and my blood ran cold. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was clear. The document stated that the Whitlock family and the HOA board had invested significant resources into upgrading my lifestyle appearance and social standing. It listed expenses, wardrobe, consultation fees, etiquette lessons, travel expenses, even a percentage of the household utility bills. The bottom line was a debt. If I were to file for divorce, or if I were to leave the marital home without cause, I would owe the Whitlock estate $75,000. "Is this a joke?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You want me to sign a contract saying I owe you $75,000 for being your wife and living in an HOA-approved house?" "It is not a debt, Zara," Graham said, his voice soothing like he was talking to a skittish horse. "It is just a formality," the lawyers insisted. "Protects the trust. You know how litigious people get these days. It is just to show that the assets used for your benefit are accounted for. You will never actually have to pay it. We are married. We are forever." I looked at him, searching for the man I thought I loved. "I am not signing this, Zara." Marianne's voice cut in from the doorway. She had let herself in, as she always did. She walked over, picked up the document, and glanced at it. "Do not be difficult. It is standard procedure for families of our stature. We cannot have people marrying in and then running off with the silver. If you have nothing to hide and no plans to leave, then signing it costs you nothing. Kicking up a fuss just makes you look like a gold digger." "I am not a gold digger," I whispered. "Then sign it," Marianne said, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "Family does not keep score." "Zara, why are you keeping score?" "I did not sign it that night." I stalled. I said I needed to read it again. I hid it in the bottom of my underwear drawer, but the threat hung over me. 75,000. I did not have 75 of my own, let alone 75,000. My bank account from my Hawthorne Ridge days had been drained to pay for joint expenses in the first year of our marriage. Another one of Graham's suggestions. I felt trapped. I had no money, no job history for the last 5 years, and a potential lawsuit hanging over my head if I tried to walk out the door. I thought about my family, my real family, or the lack thereof. My father had disappeared before I was born. My mother, a tired woman who worked double shifts at a diner until her knees gave out. Never spoke of him when I was a child, watching the other kids get picked up by their dads in shiny cars. I would ask her who he was. Was he rich? Was he a king? Was he a spy? Stop dreaming, Zara, she would say, wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled of bleach. We are nobodies. There is no rich daddy coming to save us. There is no magic castle. There is just work. Work is the only thing that is real. She died 4 years ago, right after I married Graham. She never liked him. He smiles too much with his mouth and not enough with his eyes. She had told me at the wedding. I thought she was just bitter. Now I knew she was the only one who had seen the truth. I had no one. No parents, no siblings, no cousins. I was alone in a world of sharks. The car turned into our driveway. The gravel crunching under the tires. The Whitlock estate loomed ahead. A massive colonial mansion with white pillars that looked like teeth in the moonlight. I thought about last night, the night before the gala. I had come downstairs at 2 in the morning to get a glass of water. Graham's phone was sitting on the kitchen island charging. The screen lit up with a notification. I never touched his phone. It was an unwritten rule, but the name on the screen caught my eye. Tessa. I stepped closer. The message was short. Did you get the signature? We need to lock this down before the audit next month. Make her sign. If she leaves, it all comes out. My heart had hammered against my ribs. If she leaves, it all comes out. What was it? Was it the affair? I knew they were sleeping together. I wasn't stupid. The late nights, the lingering touches, the way they looked at each other. But it all comes out sounded like something bigger than sex. It sounded like a crime. I had retreated upstairs, my mind racing. They were planning something. The reimbursement agreement wasn't just about control. It was a lock. They wanted to make sure I couldn't leave or that I would be too terrified of the debt to speak up. They needed me. They needed my silence. Or maybe they needed a scapegoat. Graham parked the car and killed the engine. The silence returned. We are home, he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Do not forget the papers are in the study. I know, I said. He got out. I sat there for a moment longer, my hand on the door handle, and then a memory flashed in my mind, a memory from last Tuesday. I had been at the bus stop near the library. I wasn't taking the bus. Graham wouldn't allow that image, but I had parked nearby to pick up some books. It had been a gray, drizzly afternoon. I was standing under the awning, closing my umbrella. When I felt eyes on me, I turned. Sitting on the metal bench, completely exposed to the drizzle, was an old man. He wore a beige raincoat that had seen better days. He had silver hair slicked back from the rain. He held a cane between his knees. He wasn't looking at the bus schedule. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at me. At the time, I had shivered, thinking he was just a creepy stranger. I had hurried into the library, looking over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me. When I came out an hour later, he was still there, sitting in the exact same spot, watching. I had driven away fast, my heart racing. I thought he was a stalker. But tonight at the gala, it was him. The same silver hair, the same cane, the same intense silent gaze. He hadn't been stalking me to hurt me. I realized that now as I stared at the dark windows of the mansion at the gala, he had moved to block Graham's view of me. He had cleaned up my mess. He had sat beside me like a guardian statue. He had been watching me for a week, maybe longer. Who was he? Why was he following me? Graham knocked on the passenger window, making me jump. Zara, are you sleeping in there? Let us go. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid night air. Come, I said. As I walked toward the house, I felt a strange sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck. I stopped and turned around, looking back toward the dark street beyond the gates. There was nothing there but shadows in the swaying moss on the oak trees. But for the first time in 5 years, I did not feel entirely alone. The old man was out there somewhere, and he knew something I did not. I walked into the house, the heavy door closing behind me with a final echoing thud. I would go to the study. I would look at the papers, but I was done playing the role of the obedient wife. If Graham wanted a signature, he was going to have to work for it. And if he wanted a fight, he had no idea that I was finally ready to give him one. The days following the gala blurred into a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. I felt like a creature being hunted, though I could not tell if the hunter was my husband, his mistress, or the silent stranger who had invaded the periphery of my life. 2 days after the event, I was running errands for the HOA. Graham had sent me to a print shop on Abercorn Street to pick up a rush order of vinyl banners for the upcoming charity golf tournament. It was humid, the air thick enough to wear, and my shirt was sticking to my back as I wrestled 3 heavy rolls of vinyl out the door. I paused to wipe sweat from my forehead, and that was when I saw him across the street. There was a small coffee shop with outdoor seating. He was there, the old man from the Gala. He was wearing a different suit today, a brown tweed that looked too heavy for the Georgia heat, but he sat with the same statue-like stillness. A cup of coffee sat untouched on the metal table in front of him. He was not reading a newspaper. He was not scrolling on a phone. He was looking directly at me. I froze, the heavy banners digging into my hip. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning rushed down my spine. Was he a private investigator? My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Had Graham hired someone to watch me to ensure I was not speaking to divorce lawyers, or was it Tessa? Did she want to dig up dirt on me to accelerate my removal from the family picture? I threw the banners into the back seat of my car and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I checked my rearview mirror every 5 seconds. I did not see his car, but the feeling of being observed lingered like the smell of smoke. The next day, I decided to test my theory. Instead of taking my usual route home from the HOA office, I took a detour. I drove through the winding residential streets of Ardsley Park, taking 3 unnecessary left turns and doubling back twice. If anyone was following me, they would have to be aggressive to keep up. I parked my car 2 blocks away from the HOA building, intending to walk the rest of the way to pick up the mail. There was a small park adjacent to the building, a patch of green with a few oak trees and benches. My heart stopped. He was there. He was sitting on a bench facing the employee entrance of the HOA building. He was feeding pigeons, tossing small crumbs of bread with a gentle rhythmic motion. But as soon as I turned the corner, his head snapped up. He knew I was there before I had even made a sound. This was not a coincidence. This was surveillance. Panic rose in my throat, acidic and sharp. I considered turning around and running. I considered calling the police. But what would I say? There is an old man sitting on a bench looking at me. He had not threatened me. He had not approached me. In fact, at the Gala, he had helped me. I forced my feet to move. I had to walk past him to get to the building. I clutched my purse against my chest like a shield and walked briskly, keeping my eyes fixed on the pavement. As I passed the bench, I fumbled. My nerves were frayed wires and my clumsy fingers lost their grip on my employee lanyard. The plastic ID card clattered onto the concrete path, sliding right to the toe of his shoe. I gasped and stopped. The old man looked down at the ID card. Then slowly he bent forward. He moved with a stiffness that spoke of age, but there was a grace to it as well. He picked up the card. I stood frozen, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to say, "Stay away from your husband, or I know what you're doing." He straightened up and held the lanyard out to me. His face was unreadable. It was a road map of wrinkles and sunspots, but his eyes were a piercing clear blue. They were not the eyes of a hired thug. They were the eyes of someone who was grieving. I reached out and took the card, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. His skin was cold. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of traffic. "Why are you following me?" He did not answer. He did not even open his mouth. He just looked at me with an intensity that made me want to cry. Then he turned his head slightly to the side to watch a passing car. And the movement pulled the collar of his shirt down just an inch. I saw it running horizontally across the front of his throat, right over the voice box. It was a scar. It was not a fresh wound. It was old, thick and jagged. A rope of keloid tissue that looked like a violent pink smile against his pale skin. It was a surgical scar, or perhaps the result of a terrible accident. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He did not speak because he could not speak. He saw me looking at the scar. He did not cover it. He simply turned back to me, held my gaze for one more second, and then gave a barely perceptible nod. It was a dismissal. "Go." The nod said, "You are safe." I turned and ran into the building, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I spent the rest of the afternoon locked in the file room pretending to sort invoices. I could not concentrate. The image of that scar and the sorrow in his eyes haunted me. He was following me, yes, but he did not feel like a predator. He felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a tragedy I did not understand. By 4 in the afternoon, my phone pinged with a notification. It was an email. I assumed it was from Graham, demanding to know why I had not replied to his text about dinner. I opened the mail app on my phone. The email was not from Graham. It was from a sender I did not recognize, a string of random letters and numbers from an encrypted service. There was no subject line. I clicked it open. The body of the email contained a single line of text written in bold red font. "Do not sign anything tonight." I stared at the screen, the breath trapped in my lungs. I looked around the empty file room, half expecting to see a camera blinking in the corner. How did this stranger know about tonight? Graham had told me about the papers in the car. Only Graham and I knew, and Marianne and Tessa presumably. Was my phone bugged? Was the car bugged? I read the message again. "Do not sign anything tonight." It had to be the old man. It had to be. He had been watching. He had been close enough to observe us. Maybe he could read lips. Maybe he had been inside the car somehow or had a listening device planted. The thought was terrifying, but the warning itself felt protective. It was an anchor thrown to a drowning woman. I deleted the email immediately, my fingers trembling. I then went to the trash folder and deleted it from there as well. If Graham saw this, he would think I was conspiring against him. He would use it as proof of my instability. I drove home in a daze. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. When I pulled into the driveway, Graham's car was already there. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Zara." Graham's voice floated from the study. "Is that you?" "Yes," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am just putting my bag down." I walked into the kitchen and drank a glass of water, trying to stop my hands from shaking. "Do not sign anything tonight." The words echoed in my mind. But if I refused, what would happen? Graham had been clear. The reimbursement agreement was the leash. If I refused to sign the restructuring papers tonight, he would tighten that leash. He would make my life a living hell. He would cut off the credit cards. He would isolate me further. I needed a plan. I needed to buy time. I walked into the study. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish. Graham was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. A single lamp casting a pool of yellow light over the leather surface. He looked up and smiled, but it was his wolf smile. "Hey," he said, standing up to kiss my cheek. "Long day." "Busy," I said, stepping out of his reach. "The banners are done." "Great," he said, dismissing my work with a wave of his hand. He gestured to the desk. A thick stack of documents sat there, flagged with yellow sticky notes. "Let us get this out of the way so we can have dinner. Marianne is coming over at 7. I looked at the stack. It was thicker than he had implied. "What is all this?" I asked, sitting in the chair opposite him. "I told you," Graham said, sitting back down and steepling his fingers. "Just trust restructuring, moving some assets around to lower our tax liability for the next fiscal year. And the updated version of the marital agreement we discussed, the lawyers just tidied up the language." He slid a black fountain pen across the desk. It spun on the wood and stopped, pointing at my chest. "Just sign where the tags are," he said. "You do not need to read the boilerplate stuff. It is all standard Latin nonsense." My stomach churned. The email flashed in my mind. "Do not sign." I picked up the pen. Felt heavy and cold. "Graham," I said, stalling. "I really think I should read it first. It is a lot of pages." His smile faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Zara, we do not have time for you to read 40 pages of legal jargon. Do you trust me or not?" "Of course I trust you," I lied. "But my mother always said never to sign something you have not read." "Your mother," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave, "died with $2,000 in her bank account and a rented apartment. My family has built an empire. Maybe you should listen to the people who know how to manage money. The insult was sharp and calculated. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted me to feel like the poor girl lucky to be in the room. It worked, but not in the way he intended. It made me angry. Fine, I said softly. I pulled the papers toward me. I flipped to the first signature page. It was a transfer of authority for the HOA trust. It essentially gave Graham veto power over all my decisions as the bookkeeper. I looked at the signature line. Zara Ortiz Whitlock. If I refused to sign, he would explode. Marianne would be here in an hour. They would gang up on me. They would break me down until I signed anyway. But if I signed, I was sealing my own fate. Then an idea sparked in the back of my mind. A desperate, dangerous idea. I uncapped the pen. Okay, I said. I will sign. I lowered the pen to the paper. Graham leaned forward, his eyes hungry, watching the tip of the pen. I began to write. I wrote the Z. I wrote the A. I wrote the R. I wrote the A. Then I moved to the last name. I wrote the W. I wrote the H. And then, with a subtle twitch of my wrist, I skipped the I. I went straight to the T. Zara Whitlock. It was a small error, a tiny omission in the cursive loop. To the naked eye, glancing quickly, it looked like my signature. It looked like the messy scroll of a tired wife, but legally it was not my name. It was a forgery of my own signature. I signed the next page. This time I dotted the I in Ortiz, but I missed the T in Whitlock. I went through the document signing 10 times. Each time I altered the signature slightly, a missing letter, a flattened loop, a letter that looked like another letter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he would hear it. If he checked, if he really looked, he would see it. He would know I was playing him. I finished the last page and capped the pen. I pushed the stack back toward him. Done, I said, keeping my voice flat. Graham grabbed the papers immediately. He flipped through them, checking for the ink on the lines. He did not look at the letters. He just looked for the completion. Good, he said, letting out a breath. He looked relieved, triumphant. See, that was not so hard. Was it? He stood up and gathered the files, locking them into his briefcase. I will take these to the office tomorrow. Now, why do you not go freshen up? You look a little pale. I stood up, my legs trembling. I will, I said. I walked out of the study and climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the tap to mask the sound. And then I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands. I had bought myself time. If they ever tried to enforce those contracts, I could claim duress. I could claim the signatures were invalid. I could prove they were inconsistent. But I had also just declared a silent war. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked pale, yes, but my eyes were bright. I was terrified, but I was no longer paralyzed. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I wanted to reply to the email. I wanted to ask the stranger who he was, but I knew better. Instead, I opened my notes app and started typing. I typed out everything that had happened, the date, the time, the coercion, the intentional missigning of the documents. I was building a record. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. I thought of the old man on the park bench. With the scar across his throat and the sadness in his eyes, he had warned me. He was watching. And for the first time I realized that whoever he was the only person in this world who was on my side. I washed my face, fixed my hair, and prepared to go downstairs and face Marianne. I was not just Zara, the background wife, anymore. I was a woman with a secret. And I was beginning to learn how to fight in the dark. The morning after I sabotaged the documents, the atmosphere in the house was brittle like dried leaves, ready to crumble into dust. I came down to breakfast with a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. Graham was already seated at the head of the table, reading the Wall Street Journal. He did not look up when I entered. I poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand was steady, but only because I was willing it to be. Sit, Graham said. He did not ask. It was a command. I sat to his right. He folded the newspaper precisely in half and set it aside. Then he reached into his briefcase, which was sitting on the floor, and pulled out the top sheet of the papers I had signed the night before. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he noticed the missing letters? Had he seen that Zara Whitlock was missing an eye? I was reviewing these this morning, Graham said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Your handwriting was erratic last night. Zara, I told you I was tired, I said, keeping my gaze on my coffee cup. My hand was cramping. Graham reached out across the table, his hand manicured and smooth, closed around my wrist. At first the touch seemed affectionate, the way a husband might comfort a wife. But then his fingers tightened. He pressed his thumb into the sensitive tendon on the underside of my wrist, digging in until a sharp bolt of pain shot up my arm. I gasped and tried to pull back, but his grip was like iron. Do not pull away, he whispered. A smile plastered on his face as the housekeeper walked in to refill the orange juice. He waited until she left the room before continuing. Sloppiness is a sign of a disrespectful mind. Zara, these documents go to the state. They go to the IRS. If you make us look incompetent, you are not just hurting the business, you are hurting the family. I am sorry, I managed to say, the pain in my wrist making my eyes water. I will do better next time. You will, he said. He squeezed one last time, hard enough to leave a bruise, and then released me. He picked up his fork and stabbed a piece of melon. Marian wants to see you today. 3 o'clock. She is hosting a tea. She says it is for reconciliation, to smooth over the stress of the gala. Do not be late. I rubbed my wrist under the table. I will be there. I knew it was not a tea. It was a summons. At 3 o'clock I arrived at Marianne's estate in Ardsley Park. The house was a monument to old money, full of heavy drapery and portraits of ancestors who looked down with judgmental stares. Marianne was in the sunroom, sitting on a floral chaise lounge. But she was not alone. Tessa Bell was there. Tessa was wearing a white sundress that made her look innocent, almost angelic. She was pouring tea from a silver pot, playing the role of the beautiful daughter-in-law that I was supposed to be. Zara, Marian said, not rising. Sit down. You look dreadful. Are you not sleeping? I am fine, I said, taking the seat opposite them. Graham said you wanted to talk. We are worried about you, Tessa said. Her voice was dripping with synthetic sympathy. She placed a cup of tea in front of me. Graham told us about how anxious you were last night, how your hands were shaking when you signed the papers, and the incident at the gala, spilling the water, freezing up on stage. It is concerning. I did not freeze, I said, my voice tight. I was blinded by the spotlight. It is paranoia. Marian cut in, her eyes narrowing. Graham says you have been taking odd routes home, that you are claiming to see people watching you. Now be honest with us, Zara, have you been speaking to anyone? A therapist, a journalist, perhaps? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. They were fishing. They wanted to know if I had leaked anything, or if my erratic behavior was a sign that I was about to blow the whistle. No, I said. I speak to no one. Who would I speak to? You are my only family. I injected as much pathetic desperation into my voice as I could muster. I needed them to think I was weak. I needed them to think I was breaking down, not gearing up. Tessa exchanged a look with Marianne, a look of satisfaction. We think it is best if I help handle your public image for a while, Tessa said, leaning forward. The HOA has some big events coming up. It might be better if you stay behind the scenes completely. I can handle the press. I can handle the homeowners. You just focus on getting your mental health back in order. We do not want people thinking the treasurer is unstable. Do we? The treasurer. The word echoed in my mind. That sounds helpful, I said, lowering my head. Thank you, Tessa. They smiled. They thought they had won. They thought they had bullied me into submission. But as I drank their bitter tea, I made a silent vow. If they wanted to frame me as the unstable treasurer, I was going to make sure I had the receipts to prove exactly who was actually spending the money. That night, I began my counteroffensive. I waited until Graham was asleep. He had taken a sleeping pill, a habit he had developed recently, which was a blessing for me. I crept out of bed and went downstairs to the small desk in the hallway where they allowed me to work. I did not turn on the lamp. I worked by the glow of the laptop screen. First, I downloaded a voice recording app on my phone. Georgia was a one-party consent state for recording conversations. As long as I was part of the conversation, I could record it without their knowledge. I tested it, whispering my own name into the microphone. It was crystal clear. From now on, every time Graham raised his voice, every time Mary and made a threat, every time Tessa made a snide comment, I would be recording. Then I logged into the HOA's accounting software. Usually I just entered the data they gave me. I processed the invoices they placed in my inbox. But tonight I decided to dig. I decided to follow the money. I pulled up the expense report for the last quarter. I started cross-referencing the vendor names with the state business registry database. Took me 2 hours, but I found it. There was a recurring payment of $12,000 a month to a company called Savannah Youth Outreach. On the books, it was listed as a consulting fee for community engagement programs. I searched for Savannah Youth Outreach in the state registry. The registered agent was a lawyer in Atlanta, but the mailing address, it was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I dug deeper. I looked at the invoices attached to the payments. They were vague. Event coordination, logistics, catering, oversight. Then I found a discrepancy in the credit card statements. There was a charge for $15,000 on the corporate card labeled Children's Charity Gala venue deposit. The date was 3 months ago. I cross-referenced the transaction ID with the bank statement. The merchant name on the bank statement was not a venue. It was Azure Coast Resort and Spa. My stomach dropped. I knew that name. It was an ultra-luxury resort in the Caribbean. I went to Tessa's Instagram page. I scrolled back 3 months, and there it was, a photo of Tessa in a white bikini holding a coconut standing on a pristine white beach. The caption read, "Research trip for the next big project. Work hard, play hard." They were not just stealing, they were stupid about it. They were using homeowners' dues to fund their vacations, their clothes, their lifestyle, and they were labeling it all as HOA expenses. And who signed off on the expense reports? Who reconciled the books at the end of the month? Zara Ortiz Whitlock, the treasurer. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was why they needed me. This was why they would not let me leave. I was not just the housekeeper. I was the firewall. If the IRS ever audited the HOA, Graham and Tessa would claim ignorance. They would say, "Oh, we just focused on the mission." Zara handled the money. Zara approved the expenses. Zara must have been embezzling. They were setting me up to go to prison for them. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. I had bought it with cash at a convenience store that afternoon. I started copying files. I downloaded the ledgers. I downloaded the fake invoices. I took screenshots of Tessa's Instagram post. I took screenshots of the bank statements showing the resort charges. I was building a bomb. And I was going to make sure that when it detonated, I was not the one holding it. The next morning, I had to go to the HOA building to drop off some checks. I walked into the lobby, my bag heavy with the flash drive hidden in the lining. The lobby was busy with couriers and staff, but my eyes immediately found the stillness in the chaos. He was there, the silent man. He was standing near the elevator. I froze. He looked at me and gave the tiniest nod, as if to say, "I am still here. I am still watching." I walked past him, my pulse racing. Later that afternoon, while Graham was out, I opened the flash drive and started organizing the evidence. Every fake invoice, every resort charge, every late-night login from Tessa's IP address. I even recorded a new conversation when Marion called to remind me about the upcoming board meeting. Her voice on the recording was pure venom. "Zara, if you breathe a word about anything, I will make sure every homeowner knows you are unstable. We have the reimbursement agreement. You owe us." I saved it all. I was no longer the quiet wife. I was the woman with the receipts. And the old man? He kept appearing. At the grocery store. At the park. Always silent, always watching, always protecting. I started to feel safe in his presence even though he never spoke. Then came the email again. Another encrypted message. "The gala presentation is your moment. Use the slides. Do not flinch." I stared at the screen. How did he know? The old man was not just watching. He was guiding. The morning before the gala, the air in the Whitlock house was so thick with tension it felt like breathing through wet wool. I woke up with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. A relentless drumbeat reminding me that today was the day the trap would either snap shut on me or on them. At 9 o'clock, Graham knocked on my door. He didn't wait for an answer. He opened it dressed in his charcoal suit, looking every inch the concerned executive. "We need you downstairs in the library. Now." I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and followed him. The library was set up like an interrogation room. Marian sat in a high-backed leather chair near the fireplace, her face a mask of stone. Next to her sat a man I recognized from the photos I had seen online, Mitchell Paris, the auditor. He was a heavy-set man with a flushed face and eyes that darted around the room, never landing on anything for more than a second. "Sit down, Zara," Marian said. I sat in the single wooden chair placed in the center of the room facing them. Felt like a trial. "This is Mr. Paris," Graham said, leaning against the desk, crossing his arms. "He is helping us finalize the audit before the gala tonight. We have hit a snag." Mr. Paris cleared his throat. He opened a thick folder on his lap. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, his voice oily and patronizing. "In reviewing the HOA's accounts, I have found significant irregularities, transfers to unauthorized accounts, personal expenses categorized as community giving. It is messy." "Messy?" I asked, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. "But I just put the receipts where Graham told me to." "Do not lie, Zara." Graham snapped. "We are past that. Mr. Paris has traced the digital footprints. The login used for these transactions was yours. The treasurer's login. You are the only one with access to that account. Technically, Mr. Paris added, looking at Graham for approval. Since the bylaws state the treasurer has sole fiduciary responsibility for daily operations, any errors fall squarely on your shoulders. If the state investigates, they will look at who pushed the buttons. And right now, all the buttons were pushed by Zara Ortiz Whitlock. They were boxing me in. They were using the very structure of the job they had forced on me to create a legal cage." Marian leaned forward. "We can fix this. Zara, Mr. Paris has prepared a statement, a procedural error acknowledgement. It essentially says that due to a lack of training and personal stress, you made errors in the ledger. It frames this as incompetence, not malice. If you sign this, we can show it to the board, pay back the missing funds from the family trust, and close the issue quietly. No police, no press." She slid a single sheet of paper across the coffee table toward me. I picked it up. It was an admission of guilt. Zara Ortiz Whitlock acknowledged that I unauthorizedly transferred funds. If I signed this, I was confessing to a felony. They said no police, but once this was signed, they could hand it to the police whenever they wanted. It was blackmail material for life. I looked at Graham. I made my lip tremble. I let tears fill my eyes. I needed them to think I was breaking. I needed them to think I was the stupid, scared girl from the wrong side of the tracks. "I do not understand all the legal words," I stammered. "But if I sign this, does it mean Graham is safe? Does it mean the family is safe?" Graham let out a short, arrogant laugh. "I am always safe, Zara. That is how the world works. The Whitlocks are the institution. People like you are the insulation. You are the ones who get replaced when the weather gets bad." I felt a cold shiver of triumph. He had said it. He had admitted I was disposable. So I whispered, looking down at the paper. "If I sign this, I am saving you. You are saving the legacy." Marianne corrected sharply. "Sign it. The family will take care of you afterwards. We will send you to a nice facility to rest somewhere quiet." A facility. They were going to institutionalize me. That was the afterwards. "Okay," I said, wiping a tear. "I will sign, but can I just send one email first?" I drafted an apology letter to the homeowners. I wanted to explain that I did not mean to hurt anyone. It is in my drafts folder. "Can I just send it so they know I am sorry?" Graham rolled his eyes. "Fine, whatever makes you feel better. Just send it and sign the damn paper." I pulled out my phone. "I will do it right now." I opened my email app. I went to the drafts folder. But the email I selected was not an apology letter. It was an email titled Evidence Package Final. Attached to it were the server log showing Tessa's IP address, the forged signature of Marianne on the shell company documents, the invoice from the Caribbean resort, the recording of Graham threatening me in the hotel restaurant, and the audio recording I had just made of this entire conversation in the library, which had been uploading in real time to the cloud. The recipients were not the homeowners. The recipients were Beatrice Sterling, the Georgia State Attorney General's office, the IRS whistleblower hotline, and 3 major investigative journalists in Atlanta. My thumb hovered over the send button. "Hurry up," Zara Graham said, checking his watch. "We have to be at the venue in 3 hours." "I am sending it," I said. "I just want to make sure the subject line is right." I pressed send. The little blue bar zipped across the screen. Message sent. I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. It was done. The bomb was in the air. Now I just had to wait for it to land. "Done," I said, looking up at them. "I sent it." "Good," Marian said. "Now sign." I picked up the pen. I leaned over the paper and then I stopped. I looked out the library window. It faced the front driveway. A black town car was idling just outside the gates. Standing on the sidewalk looking through the iron bars was the silent man. He was not alone. Standing next to him was a woman. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, dressed in an elegant silk coat. She had silver hair pulled back in a chignon. She was holding a handkerchief to her mouth. And even from this distance I could see her eyes were red and swollen. She looked devastated. The silent man saw me looking. He raised his hand and placed it over his heart. Then he pointed at the woman and then pointed at me. The woman looked at me through the window. She mouthed a word. I could not hear it, but I saw the shape of her lips. "Zara." My heart skipped a beat. Who was she? Why was she crying? "Zara," Graham shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Stop staring out the window. Sign the paper." I turned back to them. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I put the cap back on the pen. "No," I said. The room went dead silent. "What did you say?" Marian whispered. I said no. I stood up. "I am not signing this, and I am not going to your facility." Graham lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You ungrateful little." "I would not touch me if I were you, Graham," I said, my voice steady and loud. "I just sent an email." It was not an apology. It was a file containing every single illegal transaction you have made in the last 5 years. It went to the Attorney General. It went to the IRS. And it went to the press. Graham froze. His face went pale, then red. "You are lying. Check your email." I said I copied you on it. He scrambled for his phone. He swiped the screen. His eyes widened. He scrolled and the color drained from his face completely. "You hacked the server," he stammered. "I accessed my own account," I said. "The one you said I had sole responsibility for. Remember, Mr. Paris?" The auditor stood up so fast his chair fell over. "I have to go. I was not part of this. I was just consulting." "Sit down, Mitch," Marian shrieked. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You have ruined us. Do you have any idea what you have done? We are the Whitlocks." "Not for long," I said. "I am going to the gala tonight. I am going to run the presentation, and if you try to stop me, if you try to hurt me, my lawyer has instructions to release the rest of the files immediately, including the photos of you and Tessa." Graham stared at me. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. "You would not dare. You will go to jail too." "Maybe," I said, "but I will not be lonely. You will be right there in the cell next to me." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Beatrice Sterling. "The package is received. We are moving tomorrow night. Someone will stand up for you. You just need to stand tall." I looked at the text. Tomorrow night, the gala. I looked at Graham and Marian huddled together in their panic, their empire crumbling around them. "I will see you at the theater," I said. "Do not be late. It is going to be a hell of a show." I walked out of the library, leaving them in the wreckage of their own arrogance. I walked out the front door, past the gates. The town car was gone. The silent man and the crying woman were gone. But as I got into my car to drive to the venue, I touched the unopened envelope in my bag. I knew with a certainty that rattled my bones that tonight was not just about revenge. It was about a reunion. And whoever that woman was, she was part of the answer I had been waiting for my entire life. The Dock Street Theater in Charleston, South Carolina is a place where history feels heavy enough to touch. The air inside smells of old velvet floor wax and the kind of generational wealth that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. It was the perfect stage for a tragedy or a farce depending on who was writing the script. Tonight Graham and Marian Whitlock thought they were the playwrights. They did not realize they were merely the actors in the final act of their own destruction. I stood in the tech booth position stage, left hidden behind a black curtain but with a clear line of sight to the podium. My hands rested on the cool metal of the laptop. To anyone watching, I was the beautiful beaten wife relegated to the role of a glorified slide clicker. Marianne had insisted on this arrangement. She wanted me visible enough to be controlled but marginalized enough to be ignored. The theater was packed. Every seat in the orchestra and the balcony was filled with the elite of the South. There were senators, textile heirs, real estate tycoons, and enough diamonds to light up the Atlantic coastline. The press was there too, lined up in the back row with their cameras and tripods, hungry for the story of the new vision Graham had promised them. At 7 o'clock sharp the house lights dimmed. The chatter died down, replaced by the hushed anticipation of a crowd that expects to be entertained. Marian Whitlock walked onto the stage first. She wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered under the spotlights. She looked regal, benevolent, the very image of the charitable matriarch. She stepped to the microphone, her smile projecting a warmth that never reached her eyes. "Welcome," she said, her voice projecting effortlessly. "Welcome to a night of promise. When my late husband founded this organization 40 years ago, he believed that those of us who have been blessed with abundance have a sacred duty to share it." The audience applauded politely. I watched her from the shadows. I thought about the shell companies. I thought about the forged signatures. I thought about the $75,000 debt she had tried to hang over my head like a guillotine blade. "Tonight is not just about looking back," Marianne continued, gesturing grandly. "It is about the future, and leading us into that future is a man who embodies integrity, passion, and leadership. My son, Graham Whitlock." The applause grew louder as Graham strode onto the stage. He looked every inch the golden boy. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection. His hair was swept back. He shook his mother's hand and took the podium, gripping the edges with a confidence that made my stomach churn. He looked up toward the tech booth. He could not see me clearly through the glare of the spotlights, but he knew I was there. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was a command. "Do your job. Stick to the script." But before Graham could begin his speech, Tessa Bell walked onto the stage. This was not in the official run-of-show document I had been given. Tessa was wearing a red dress that was just on the right side of scandalous. She held a handheld microphone, acting as the moderator for the evening. She stood next to Graham, looking up at him with adoring eyes, then turned to the audience. "Thank you, Graham," she said, her voice dripping with honey. "Before we get to the numbers, I just want to take a moment to address the elephant in the room, or rather the empty seat at the head table." She gestured to the empty chair in the front row where I should have been sitting as the wife of the treasurer. "Many of you know Zara Graham's lovely wife," Tessa said, her tone shifting to a practiced somber sympathy. "Zara is here tonight helping us from the tech booth. But I think it is important for our family of homeowners to know that it has been a very difficult year for her." I stiffened. Here it came. The character assassination. The pressure of managing an HOA of this size can be overwhelming. Tessa continued, lowering her voice so the audience had to lean in. "And unfortunately, Zara has been struggling with significant mental health challenges recently. The stress has led to some episodes of confusion and paranoia." A ripple of whispers went through the room. I saw heads turn toward each other. "Did you hear poor Graham dealing with a crazy wife? We are doing everything we can to support her," Tessa said, placing a hand on Graham's arm. "Graham has been a saint, standing by her side through the outbursts and the delusions." So if you see Zara tonight, please give her space. We want her to feel safe even if her reality is a little different from ours right now. It was brilliant. It was evil. By framing me as paranoid and delusional before I even opened my mouth, they had immunized themselves. If I ran out on stage screaming about embezzlement now, the audience would just shake their heads and say, "Oh, there she goes." Tessa warned us. Graham looked somber, accepting the silent sympathy of the room. He looked like a martyr. I stood in the booth, my finger hovering over the mouse. I felt a cold, hard rage crystallizing in my chest. They thought they had buried me. They thought they had stripped me of my credibility. But they had forgotten one thing. Facts do not care about reputation. And bank statements do not have mental health issues. "Thank you, Tessa," Graham said, taking back the floor. "It is a heavy burden, but family is everything. Now let us talk about why we are here. The community." He clicked a remote in his hand which signaled my laptop. "Slide 1. Zara," he said into the microphone, his voice casual. I clicked the mouse. The screen behind him lit up with the image of the Vision for Tomorrow logo. It was the correct slide, the safe slide. Graham relaxed. I could see the tension leave his shoulders. He thought I had capitulated. He thought the threat of prison and the public shaming had worked. "We have raised over $3 million this fiscal year," Graham announced. "And I want to show you exactly where that money is going. Transparency is the cornerstone of the Oakwood Estates HOA. Next slide," he said. I clicked. A graph appeared showing a steep upward curve of direct distribution. It was a lie. I had made the graph myself 2 days ago using random numbers Graham had scribbled on a napkin. "As you can see," Graham said, gesturing to the screen, 90 cents of every dollar goes directly to the programs. We keep our overhead low. We keep our team lean." He was getting into his rhythm now. He was charismatic, charming, completely believable. "We have launched new initiatives in education, healthcare, and housing," Graham said. "And we have done it all with a surplus." Next slide. I clicked again. A photo of a smiling child holding a book appeared. "This is little Marcus," Graham said. "Because of your dues, Marcus has textbooks for the first time." The audience awed. Marion dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief in the front row. It was sickening. They were using the faces of children they had never met to fund their vacations and their shell companies. I looked at the file list on my screen. The file named Whitlock Reality Presentation was open in the background. I just had to switch windows. One click, but not yet. The timing had to be perfect. I needed him to dig the hole deeper. I needed him to commit to the lie so fully that there was no way to climb back out. Graham was winding up for his big finish. And that is why I am proud to announce our new capital campaign. We are asking for another $5 million to build a new community center in the 9th Ward. Suddenly there was a disturbance at the back of the theater. The heavy oak doors of the main entrance swung open with a loud groan that cut through Graham's speech. He stopped mid-sentence. The audience turned around. Standing in the doorway was the silent man. He was dressed in a tuxedo that looked older than the building itself, yet it fit him with an elegance that made Graham's modern suit look cheap. He held his cane in his right hand. He was not alone. Flanking him were 2 large men in dark suits, private security of the highest caliber. The usher, a young woman with a flashlight, tried to step in front of him. "Sir, you cannot come in during the presentation." "Do you have a ticket?" The silent man did not stop. He did not look at her. He simply kept walking. One of his guards gently but firmly moved the usher aside. The sound of his cane, hitting the hardwood floor, tap tap, echoed in the silent theater. Graham squinted against the stage lights. "Excuse me," he said into the microphone. "We are in the middle of a private event." The silent man ignored him. He walked down the center aisle. There was an energy radiating off him that sucked the air out of the room. It was the energy of absolute, unquestionable authority. As he passed the rows of seats, people began to react. An older gentleman in the 3rd row, a retired judge, gasped and stood up. Then a banker in the 4th row stood up. It was a chain reaction. They stood up not out of politeness but out of shock and reflex. They recognized him. Or if they did not recognize his face, they recognized the aura of power that walked with him. Marian Whitlock turned in her seat. When she saw him, her face went white, not pale white like a sheet of paper. She grabbed the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles popped. The silent man reached the front row. There was a single empty seat reserved for a special donor that Graham had mentioned earlier, hoping to lure a tech billionaire from Atlanta. The silent man stopped in front of it. He looked at Graham. He looked at Marianne. He did not say a word. He simply nodded once at the chair. Graham was paralyzed. "I do not believe we have met," he stammered, his charisma evaporating. The silent man sat down. He rested his hands on his cane and looked up at the stage. He looked directly at the tech booth. He looked at me. His face was impassive, but his eyes were blazing. He gave me a small, sharp nod. Now my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. But something caught my eye. The stage lights were reflecting off the man's chest. He was wearing a tie clip. It was gold, simple and worn smooth by time. I grabbed the pair of opera glasses I had found in the booth's drawer, left over from a previous production, and raised them to my eyes. I focused on the tie clip. There were 2 letters engraved on the gold bar. BH. I froze. The image of the birth certificate flashed in my mind. The redacted line where my father's name should be, the black ink that covered the truth. But I had seen the tops of the letters under the censorship, a B and an H, and the note. "They lied about your blood." The pieces slammed together with the force of a collision. Beaumont Hale. The name floated up from the recesses of my memory. Beaumont Hale was not just a rich man. He was a legend. He was the recluse billionaire who had built the Hale Crescent shipping empire in the 70s and then vanished from public life after a personal tragedy. He was rumored to be the wealthiest man in the Carolinas, a man who owned half the ports on the eastern seaboard. And he was sitting in the front row of my husband's fraud trial, wearing a tie clip with the initials of my father, my grandfather. He was my grandfather. The realization brought tears to my eyes. Hot and fast. I was not a nobody. I was not trash picked up by the Whitlocks. I was the granddaughter of a king. Marian knew. She had to know. That was why she looked so terrified. That was why she had kept me close, kept me controlled, kept me isolated. If I was a Hale, I was worth more than their entire HOA combined. They had stolen my heritage to make me a servant. I lowered the glasses. I looked at Graham on stage. He was sweating now, trying to regain the audience's attention. "Right," Graham said, his voice cracking slightly. "Let us continue. Slide 4. Zara, the future projects." He thought he was still in charge. He thought the old man was just a disruption. I put my hand on the mouse. I felt a calm wash over me that was deeper than the ocean. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the name that had been stolen from me. I moved the cursor. I closed the Whitlock fantasy window. I opened the Whitlock reality window. "Slide for Graham," repeated, a hint of impatience in his tone. "Zara." I leaned into the microphone in the booth, which was connected to the house speakers. I had not turned it on until this very second. "One moment, Graham," I said. My voice boomed through the theater, amplified and crystal clear. "I think we skipped a slide." Graham froze. The audience turned their heads toward the booth. "What are you doing?" Graham hissed, covering his mic, but not well enough. "I just want to make sure the homeowners see everything," I said. I clicked the mouse. The screen behind Graham flickered. The smiling picture of little Marcus vanished. In its place appeared a high-resolution scan of a bank transfer. Amount $15,000. Recipient Azure Coast Resort Spa. Authorized by Graham Whitlock. Memo: charity gala venue deposit fake. Beside it I had placed the photo of Tessa in her bikini at that exact resort, dated the same week as the transfer. The audience gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "What is that?" someone shouted from the balcony. Graham spun around. He saw the screen. He staggered back as if he had been shot. "Turn it off," he screamed. "Technical glitch. Turn it off." It is not a glitch, Graham. I said, my voice steady. It is the receipts. I clicked again. A new slide appeared. The Shell Company Incorporation papers, the signature of Marion Whitlock clearly forged in Graham's handwriting, and next to it the ledger showing monthly payments of $8,000 to that Shell Company. Total embezzled $450,000. Marion stood up in the front row. Lies, she shrieked. She is crazy. I told you she was crazy. Am I? I asked. Next slide. I clicked again. The screen went black. Then white text appeared. The confession, and then the audio started playing. It was the recording from the hotel restaurant. Graham's voice, unmistakable, boomed through the speakers. If you do not sign, I will trigger the reimbursement agreement. I will sue you for every penny you do not have. You will be on the street, Zara, just like your mother. Then Marianne's voice. We will send you to a nice facility to rest somewhere quiet. Then Graham again. People like you. You are the insulation. You are the ones who get replaced when the weather gets bad. The silence in the theater was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Graham stood on stage, small and trembling. He looked out at the sea of faces. The faces of the people he had charmed. The people he had swindled. They were not smiling anymore. They looked horrified. They looked disgusted. I looked down at the front row. Beaumont Hale. My grandfather sat perfectly still. He was looking at Graham with a gaze that could peel paint off the walls. Then slowly he raised his hands and started to clap, 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 clap. It was a slow, mocking applause. The sound of Judgment Day. I stood up in the booth. I was shaking, but I was standing. I had burned it all down, and from the ashes I was about to introduce them to the real Zara. The chaos in the auditorium was absolute. The slow, mocking applause of the silent man, my grandfather, cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. But Graham and Marianne were not ready to surrender. They were survivors of their own narcissism, convinced that they could spin any disaster if they just spoke loudly enough. Graham signaled frantically to the sound engineer in the back, a young man who looked terrified, to cut my microphone. The speakers gave a sharp whine of feedback, and my voice from the booth was silenced. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Marion shouted, her voice shrill without amplification, but she grabbed a handheld mic from the podium. Please stay seated. We are experiencing a malicious cyber attack on our system. The images you just saw are fabricated. They are deep fakes created to slander this family. She turned her eyes to the tech booth, her gaze burning with a hatred so intense I could feel it from 50 feet away. Zara, she commanded, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. Come down here right now. Do not let your illness destroy this night. Come down here and apologize to these good people for this episode. It was a bold gambit. She was betting everything on the narrative that I was insane. She was banking on the fact that the Savannah elite would rather believe a hysterical woman was having a breakdown than accept that their golden boy was a thief. I stepped out of the booth. I walked down the side stairs, my heels clicking on the metal steps. The entire room turned to watch me. I did not look down. I looked straight ahead at the stage. I walked up the aisle. I climbed the stairs to the stage. Graham looked relieved. He thought I was coming to surrender. He thought I had been cowed by the public pressure. He moved to intercept me, blocking me from the podium. I am so sorry, everyone, Graham said into his microphone, putting a hand on my shoulder, a grip that dug into my collarbone. My wife has been under tremendous strain. She gets confused. We will get her the help she needs immediately. He leaned in close to my ear, his breath hot and wet. Say you are sorry, he hissed. Say it, or you will never see the light of day again. I stood there under the blinding lights. I looked at the audience. I looked at the homeowners who were whispering behind their hands. I did not say a word. Zara, Marion prompted, stepping closer, her smile tight and predatory. Tell them, dear. Tell them it was a mistake. I remained silent. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until the audience stopped whispering and started holding their breath. She cannot speak, Graham said quickly, trying to fill the void. She is in shock. It is the accounting errors. She feels so guilty about the mistake she made. Stop. The word did not come from me and it did not come from Graham. Came from the front row. The silent man had stood up. He had not spoken the word. The man standing next to him, the lawyer I had seen in the lobby, had spoken it, his voice projecting with the authority of a judge. But the silent man's hand was raised in the air, a flat palm commanding silence. Graham froze. Excuse me, who are you to interrupt? The silent man walked toward the stage stairs. The security guards moved aside instantly. He ascended the steps with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Thump step, thump step. He stopped 5 feet away from Graham. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He towered over my husband, radiating a cold, ancient power. The lawyer stepped up to the microphone stand that Graham had abandoned. My name is Arthur Sterling, the lawyer announced. And I am not here to interrupt. I am here to represent the man standing next to me, a man who has not made a public appearance in 20 years, but who traveled here tonight because he witnessed a crime in progress. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur continued, you may know the legend, but you have never seen the face. Please welcome Mr. Beaumont Hale, founder and chairman of Hale Crescent Holdings. The air left the room. Beaumont Hale. The name was mythical. He was the wealthiest man in the Carolinas, a shipping magnate who owned half the port of Charleston. He was a ghost story, a billionaire recluse who had vanished after a personal tragedy decades ago. And he was standing on stage at a charity gala for a mid-sized HOA. Mr. Hale. Marian whispered, her hand going to her throat. The color drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. We are honored, but I do not understand. Beaumont looked at her. He did not smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. He wrote something quickly, tore off the page, and handed it to the lawyer. Arthur read the note aloud. I do not speak because I lost my voice to throat cancer 12 years ago, but I have found that silence is a useful tool. When you do not speak, people assume you are not listening. They reveal themselves. And for the last week, I have been listening to you lie. Graham laughed nervously. Mr. Hale, surely you are not listening to the ramblings of my wife. As we said, she is unwell. She has no family, no support system, and the stress. Beaumont tapped his cane on the floor. Crack. Arthur spoke again. That brings us to the second reason Mr. Hale is here. You claim Zara Ortiz has no family. You claim she is a nobody that you graciously rescued. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. He held it up. This is a DNA test conducted by a private lab in Atlanta 3 days ago using a sample acquired from Ms. Ortiz's coffee cup and compared against Mr. Hale's genetic markers. My heart stopped. He had taken the sample at the coffee shop. That was why he was there. The probability of relation is 99.9%. Arthur announced, his voice booming. Zara Ortiz is not a nobody. She is the daughter of Elena Hale. Mr. Hale's only child who ran away from home 35 years ago. Zara is Beaumont Hale's granddaughter and she is the sole heir to the Hale Crescent fortune. The room exploded. People stood up. Cameras flashed wildly. I stared at the old man, my grandfather. Tears blurred my vision. He turned to me, his blue eyes softening. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. It was the first tender touch I had felt in years. But the lawyer was not done. However, Arthur said, cutting through the noise. This is not a surprise to everyone in the room. He turned to Marianne. Mrs. Whitlock, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You knew. Marianne took a step back. I did not. How could I? We subpoenaed your private emails this morning, Arthur said. 5 years ago, before Zara married your son, you hired a private investigator to do a background check on her. You found out who her mother was. You found out she was the lost Hale heir. The audience gasped. You knew, Arthur continued, that Beaumont Hale was searching for his daughter and grandchild, but instead of reuniting them, you blocked the investigator from contacting Mr. Hale. You buried the report. You targeted Zara. You encouraged your son to marry her not for love but because you wanted to secure the resource. You thought if you could control her, isolate her, and make her dependent on you, then one day when the old man died and the truth came out, you would control the fortune. I looked at Marianne. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It was not just exploitation. It was kidnapping in plain sight. She had stolen my family from me. She had let my mother die in poverty while sitting on the secret that could have saved her. You monster, I whispered. Marianne's mask crumbled. I did what I had to do. She was nothing. She was working at a consulting firm. We gave her a life. We gave her a name. And then you tried to frame her for your crimes, Arthur said. The screen behind us lit up again. Beaumont had signaled to the tech booth. New documents appeared. These are the transfer logs from the last 48 hours. Arthur explained. Mr. Hale has purchased the debt, the reimbursement agreement you used to blackmail Zara. It is now owned by Hale Crescent Holdings. And Mr. Hale has declared it null and void due to signing under duress. Graham looked around wildly like a rat looking for a sewer grate. This is a misunderstanding. We were protecting the HOA. Zara signed the confession. She admitted it. Yes, I said. I stepped back to the microphone. The confession. I looked at Graham. You wanted everyone to hear what I had to say. You wanted a confession. Well, here it is. I pulled the remote from Graham's pocket. He was too shocked to stop me. I pressed the button. The final slide appeared and the audio from the library played. It was crystal clear. Graham's voice. I am always safe, Zara. That is how the world works. The Whitlocks are the institution. People like you are the insulation. You are the ones who get replaced when the weather gets bad. Marianne's voice. Sign it. The family will take care of you afterwards. We will send you to a nice facility to rest somewhere quiet. Graham's voice. If the state investigates, they will look at who pushed the buttons. And right now all the buttons were pushed by Zara Ortiz Whitlock. The recording ended. Graham stood there stripped naked in front of the world. There was no spin that could save him now. No PR strategy, no mental health excuse. They had been caught on tape conspiring to frame an innocent woman. Beaumont Hale reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He handed it to me. I opened it. Inside were papers establishing a trust in my name, effectively restoring my birthright. But clipped to the front was a handwritten note. The ink was shaky, but the letters were bold. I found you late, but I am with you now. You never have to be alone again. I looked up at him. He was crying. Silent tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. I stepped forward and hugged him. He smelled of sandalwood and old paper, the smell of safety. He held me tight, his cane falling to the floor with a clatter. I pulled away and turned to Graham and Marianne. Police officers were entering from the back of the theater. Arthur had timed this perfectly. Graham was shaking. Zara, please. We are family. We can work this out. I can explain. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had washed clothes for. The man I had cooked for. The man I had let belittle me for 5 years because I thought I had nowhere else to go. I pressed the button on the remote one last time. The screen went black. The show was over. You are right, Graham, I said, my voice ringing out in the silent theater. You spent 5 years telling me I was nothing without the Whitlock name. You told me I was just a guest in your world. The police were on the stage now. One officer took Graham's wrists and pulled them behind his back. Another moved toward Marianne. I walked up to Graham. I looked him dead in the eye. I do not need you to call me family anymore, I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. I do not need your name. I have my own now. From this moment on, I just need you to call me defendant. The flash of 100 cameras erupted at once. Blinding white light capturing the exact moment the Whitlock empire crumbled into dust. Thank you for sitting through this wild ride with me. The old man, my grandfather Beaumont Hale, never spoke a single word that night, but his presence said everything. The police led Graham and Marian away in handcuffs, while the homeowners who once applauded their every move now stared in stunned silence. Tessa tried to slip out the side door, but the lawyers were waiting. The embezzlement charges would stick. The forged documents, the fake vendors, the Caribbean trips, all of it was out in the open. And me? I stood on that stage with my grandfather's hand on my shoulder for the first time, feeling like I belonged somewhere. The DNA test confirmed it. I was Elena Hale's daughter, the lost heir. Marianne had known since the day I met Graham. She had buried the report, hired investigators, and orchestrated the whole marriage just to keep the land and the HOA under her thumb. The neighborhood itself sat on Hale family land deeded decades ago with clauses that could revert control if the heir ever surfaced. They had stolen my birthright to keep their little kingdom intact. But silence has power. The old man had used it to watch, listen, and wait. He had protected me without a word because words had been taken from him by cancer years ago. Now his silence had spoken louder than any scream. The reimbursement agreement? Null and void. The debt? Gone. The house? Mine if I wanted it, but I didn't. I walked away from the mansion that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the flash drive in my bra. The HOA board dissolved in emergency session the next week. New elections were called, and the ridiculous rules started getting rewritten by people who actually lived there. No more fining someone for a flag half an inch too big. No more grass police at dawn. The community fund went back to actual community projects, not spa days. I opened the white envelope from my grandfather the next morning after the dust settled. Inside was a letter in shaky handwriting and a key to a safety deposit box. The letter read simply, "I searched for you for 35 years. Your mother ran to protect you from this world. I am sorry I found you so late." The box held old photos of my mother as a child, letters she wrote before she disappeared, and the original deed to the land. I cried for the first time without fear. The old man sat beside me in the bank vault, still silent, but his hand rested on mine. No words needed. Justice had come not with shouting but with quiet, unstoppable truth. Graham and Marian faced charges: embezzlement, fraud, coercion. The recordings, the slides, the DNA, the emails, all of it sealed their fate. Tessa flipped for a lighter sentence and spilled everything. The neighborhood buzzed for weeks. Homeowners who once feared the Karen president now laughed about the day the quiet wife took down the empire. I moved into a small house on the edge of Oakwood Estates, nothing fancy, just mine. No more clipboards. No more spilled water. No more living in the shadows. The old man visits every Sunday. We sit on the porch, he with his cane, I with my coffee. He still doesn't speak, but his eyes say everything. Proud. Safe. Home. And every time I see a new family move in, I smile, knowing the rules are fair, the dues are honest, and no one gets to play king in a neighborhood that finally belongs to everyone. If there's one lesson from all this, it's that the quiet ones, the background wives, the rule followers, we see everything. We remember everything. And when the moment comes, we don't just spill the water. We spill the truth. The HOA Karen thought she ruled forever. But silence and patience beat power every single time. Thanks for listening to my story. Drop a comment where you're watching from and tell me your own HOA horror tale. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so more people hear how the little guy finally wins. See you in the next one.